Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very well today. Continuing with my discussion of the films directed by the great Italian maestro, Dario Argento. Today I'd like to talk to you about a very peculiar film, 2007. The Mother of Tears. So this is a Blu-ray that I got, and this is from France, I want to say. Yes, France. So this is a French Blu-ray, and it has English. It has an English soundtrack. So it's a This is the film that is supposed to be the third installment in the so-called Three Mothers trilogy. Now, as you know, the Three Mothers trilogy begins with the film Suspiria. And in fact, I think Suspiria itself, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to it purposely being a film that's setting up the Three Mothers trilogy, if you know what I mean. In the discussion of Suspiria that I did some time back, you may recall that I think that I mentioned, or maybe my discussion of Inferno, I mentioned that Suspiria as a film, it seems to be its own world. And then the next film in the Three Mothers trilogy, so to speak, was the film Inferno. Now, Inferno then expanded upon the world that was set up in Suspiria, and it sort of went off on its own thing, of course. But I think Inferno did a lot to set up the Three Mothers mythos more than Suspiria did, although Suspiria, of course, is meant to be part of that mythos, at least as it was set up in the film Inferno. So that's all to say that I think a lot of the Three Mothers stuff that we've come to know comes from Inferno, and it has its basis more or less in the film Inferno. And so this film is thus a continuation of the stuff that was set up in Inferno. Namely, you've got three mothers, and you've got three houses in different parts of the world, and you have these are supposedly three witches who are malevolent, and they are evil, and they have lots of power. So it's this idea of who they are and what are the stakes. Okay. So, with that in mind, my friends, let me talk about this film in detail. And if you haven't seen the film, and if you are wary of being spoiled, I suggest that you stop this video right now and go and watch the film Mother of Tears. And then when you have seen the film, you can come back to this video at any time, and you can watch this video and watch what I have to say. So, this is I would say, I saw this film when it was first released in theaters in New York, and I remember the buzz that it had because it was supposedly, right, it was very exciting because it was Argento returning to the world of Three Mothers, and it was, therefore, it had a direct through line with Suspiria and Inferno, which are considered to be, by many, to be Argento's masterworks, and in particular Suspiria. And I, for one, believe that Suspiria should be considered to be one of the great Italian films, not just Italian horror films, but Italian films from the 1970s. It's a masterwork of Italian cinema. So it really should be regarded with great respect. So with that in mind, it was great, it was exciting to know that Argento was going to, quote unquote, finish the trilogy. And then I saw the film in the theater, and it was, yes, it was, on the one hand, it was very campy, and it was quite a bloody affair. And I have to say, it's not a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. It is the weakest of the three, that's for sure. And there are certain aspects of the film that have that I'm very curious about, and that really are, I think, there are nice changes to the presentation of the three mothers storyline. So it helps to differentiate this film from the other two. And there are nice ways of connecting. There's a nice connective tissue, I think that's the phrase, to the Suspiria and to Inferno. So the connection to Inferno is, of course, the book, The Three Mothers, by E. Varelli, and there's also the notion of Mater Lacrimarum, of course, made an appearance in Inferno. She's a fan of Verdi. And then now she appears here. I think the actress is different, but the character is supposed to be consistently the same one. And then, of course, this film also harkens back to Suspiria, mentioning Susie Bannion by name, also making reference to Mater Suspiriorum, and apparently what happened. There's a certain backstory element with respect to Mater Suspiriorum and Sarah's mother, who is apparently a good witch. Okay, so there is this attempt to flesh out the mythology and the background, at least as far as what happened to Mater Suspiriorum, why was she so old and apparently deformed in that way in that film. So there is a lot of fleshing out of the backstory here, which I can admire and appreciate, right? But unfortunately, the way it's fleshed out, I think, is not so good, because I think the main example of why it's not so good is Sarah's mother. Now, as you know from the film, Sarah's mother has this, it's like an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of thing. She's dead, but she seems to be using the Force to help Sarah get out of situations, and she actually appears as a specter in some ways. So she's like a Force ghost, and she has certain powers, and she's played, of course, by Daria Nicolodi. So it's really nice to see Daria Nicolodi here, and Daria Nicolodi playing the mother of Sarah Mann, who's played, of course, by her real-life daughter, Asia Argento. So there's a nice touch here. This is really lovely to see this family connection again, and especially because apparently, I think at this point in time, Dario Argento and Daria Nicolodi were no longer a couple, but it was nice to see Daria Nicolodi return. Although I must say that her role, I think, was quite a thankless one, and it was one where it seemed a little bit odd and silly, and I said it's like an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of thing. And she's a Force ghost, so it seemed to be a bit odd. So I wasn't really connecting with that aspect of the film, unfortunately. There are some other aspects that I think are worth mentioning, that are worthy of praise. I think I like the fact that unlike the films Suspiria and Inferno. Granted, I love those films very much, but what I liked about this film is that it tried to differentiate itself from those other two films by creating the mass hysteria aspect. This idea that once Mater Lacrimarum has gotten her cloak and she's gotten more powerful, there seems to be more influence of her evil across all of Rome, not just within the house, so to speak. So I like this idea of it being a bit of an epidemic scare, and it's a wide-reaching epidemic that is akin to some kind of catastrophe or great disaster movie almost. And I like that element. I like how the horror seems to be broken out. In the films Inferno and Suspiria, they were all enclosed within the house or the houses. So here they're out in the open, and it seems like there are many bad players at work, so there's a sense of danger. So I like that, and I like how what that does is that creates these setups where even bright open spaces that felt safe at the beginning can suddenly turn sinister and evil. And I think the great one, I don't know if it's great, but a memorable one is the one where Sarah is being pursued on the train. and it has a pretty funny way of concluding with the Japanese punk rock girl getting her face smashed in the door there, but her eyeball popping out, I think. And that's a very memorable set piece, that's for sure. So my point there is that it's nice for this narrative setup because it gives Argento the opportunity to basically create horror and suspense out of thin air, and I think that's what he does really well. We saw that, I think, very well in the film Sleepless. So it's nice to see that kind of continuation here again. It's also nice to see callbacks. We have killer monkeys, and we also have long spear things that are used, and we also have Udo, the great Udo Kier. I think he has a very small, memorable role that ends up being pretty much a throwaway role, but a little bit of Udo is better than no Udo at all, if you ask me. So I think it's nice to see him, and of course that's a nice callback as well to Suspiria. Of course, in Suspiria he was playing a different character. I think he was called Frank Mandel. He was here on a convention. So it's nice to see that kind of callback, and it's nice to see the callback of the idea of the witch and the witch's coven and the hidden house. So I like that idea of Sarah going into the catacombs, so to speak, and finding the headquarters, if you will, of Mater Lacrimarum and her cult. So I like that. That harkens back also to that lovely moment when they discover the houses and the secret of the houses in the previous two films. So this is really a great, I like those connections. But there are issues, and the issues, I think, are that there is no flair, there is no style to the film, and it's an assault on the senses, but without any kind of thought about posterity. You know what I mean? Everything is for the moment and for the now, and which means that everything is graphic, up close. You get shots of intestines falling out, like people's mouths being obliterated, and you see eyeballs popping out, and you see blood splurting out of necks, and you see this giant thing impale someone, like blah, So all this is, of course, a tour de force of special effects and the like, but there is something missing. There's something just it's gross and it's in your face, but it doesn't. I don't know. It feels like the Argento touch is missing. There's a lot to be said in cinema, like famous filmmakers like Ernst Lubitsch. There's always this idea of the Lubitsch touch and how he's able to get around certain situations of sexual innuendo because he can present certain scenes in a perfectly encapsulated way. Well, Argento was like that in his earlier films. He had a way of escalating the violence, and he never was always in your face. He always threw the elements in there in the pot, but he stirred it in a way that drew attention to one aspect and another aspect and another aspect, and then finally the buildup was so intense that it crescendoed and it just exploded in a spectacular climax. Well, here in Mother of Tears, it seems like everything is in your face from the get-go, and so there is none of that manipulation of horror elements that we saw in earlier kill scenes in, let's say, Suspiria or Inferno or Tenebrae, or even Sleepless, or even Trauma or Stendhal Syndrome. So I think there's a little bit of everything is too much in the fore from the get-go, and that means that there isn't enough of Argento's touch in terms of presenting certain elements in a way that builds upon each other and crescendos to a climax. I don't get that sense here, unfortunately. And so maybe that's just a sign of there being just so many characters to deal with, because there are a lot of characters here, because Sarah goes from one place to another, and she meets so many people, and then as soon as she meets them, they apparently just die and they get killed. And so maybe it's a result of there being too many characters to deal with. There's a high body count as a result. Speaking of high body count, it's interesting too, because there are some children and babies who get killed as well. And now I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, of course, I know it's fake, and I know it's a film and a movie, and of course, children. There are films where children get killed and all, but I don't know. This felt to me to be a little bit gratuitous and maybe not so necessary. In terms of the context of the narrative. They seem to be completely, like a baby being thrown over into a river or something, and the whole subplot with the child. I thought that was a bit maybe unnecessary. It just felt like showing off killing a child for the sake of that shock. It wasn't anything to do that seemed of any narrative significance, and so it feels a little bit, I'm not sure, I don't know if I really like that sort of thing. So, but it's not frequent in the film. So I think it's something, and of course the film is a fake thing. It's just a movie magic. I know it's a special effect. So I think it's something that one can get over. It's not. I don't find it to be morally reprehensible or anything like that. But it's just a little bit, maybe a little bit too unpleasant for my own tastes. And I think also there are, again, we have to mention Asia Argento, and she's in this film, and she, regardless of how you feel about her as a person, she does give a performance here that is, I think, I would say it's a good performance, but I think Sarah Mandy as a character is a little bit bland. I think she lacks some of the more interesting aspects that occupied other characters that Asia Argento played in earlier Dario Argento films, such as Trauma. I thought Argento's character, Aura, was quite fascinating and delicate and tragic, and it was a performance of the highest caliber, I thought. And I thought also the Stendhal syndrome, the detective Anna Mani. I thought Asia Argento gave a tour de force performance in that film. I thought she was magnetic and electrifying and frightening. Well, here I think it's the fact that the character Sarah Mandy is a little bit of she's a very upright character, and she's the hero of the film, and we are meant to follow her, and I think we do to a certain extent. But it does seem a little bit bland, and I think there isn't really much for her, for Asia Argento as an actress to work with there. But she does a very good job. But it's not a bad character; it's a really good character. But I would say it's not the most memorable hero in Dario Argento's universe. I should say finally that I mentioned Daria Nicolodi here. Now, my understanding of the film is that Daria Nicolodi did not have anything to do with the writing of this film. Now, if I'm mistaken on that point, and you know that I'm mistaken, please let me know. I'd love to be corrected on that. But as far as I know, unless I am corrected, I must say that Daria Nicolodi was not involved in the writing or the conception of this particular story. Now, this is very interesting, right? Because Daria Nicolodi apparently, right, or not apparently, she was directly involved in the creation or the co-creation of the stories of Suspiria, and yes, Inferno. And so it's basically her story. And of course, Dario Argento has some input there, or quite a significant degree of input, of course. But I think the Three Mothers saga, if you will, it seems like it's a saga that should have been capped off with a proper story that was conceived or co-conceived by Daria Nicolodi. And this does not seem like it was that story. Now, of course, Daria Nicolodi does appear as the mother, the Obi-Wan Force ghost, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she wrote the film, right? And I don't think she's given any credit, and I've never heard or read anything about her involvement in that capacity. So, and when I see the film, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it has the touch of Daria Nicolodi that we saw in Suspiria and Inferno, to be perfectly honest. This is speculation on my part, but it feels totally bereft of those touches. And so I think I'm left, therefore, wondering what could have been. If I'm right if I'm right in my assumption that Daria Nicolodi had nothing to do with the writing or conception of the story of this film, then I'm left wondering what could have been. What could have been had Daria Nicolodi and Dario Argento gotten together and made the final film in the trilogy? What would have happened had they decided to come together maybe earlier in their careers and in their lives, let's say in the 80s, after Inferno. Inferno was 1980. So what if they decided to come together in 82, 83, 84? That would have been very interesting. That would have been during their time together, Tenebrae and Phenomena and Opera, which I understand, around that time, perhaps their relationship was ending or was about to end. And so perhaps they weren't on very good terms by then, to the point where they could work together. And I understand also that Daria Nicolodi had some argument with Dario Argento with respect to story credit regarding the film Inferno. And so I know that there is a very complex professional and personal history between the two. Be that as it may, it's undoubtedly that Daria Nicolodi is very important to the to Dario Argento's personal and professional life. Undoubtedly, unquestionably, she is so important. She reminds me a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's relationship with Alma Reville. Because Alma Reville seems to me to be essential to the legend that is Alfred Hitchcock as a filmmaker. And I think a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's greatness comes in no small part from Alma Reville's contributions. Well, I think that same could be said for Daria Nicolodi and Dario Argento's contributions or collaborations. The films where Daria Nicolodi was involved, up to Mother of Tears, of course, but all the way up to Opera, I think are undoubtedly the peak of Argento's career. And so there's a lot to be said about that. And so the fact that Daria Nicolodi, she makes an appearance here in kind of a throwaway role or thankless role, I think on the one hand it's nice to see her, and it's nice to see her family connection. Again, she's the mother of the main character, and she's actually the real life mother of Agio Argento. But it would have been nice to see some kind of final closure of the saga, properly penned by Daria Nicolodi or co-authored by Daria Nicolodi. It would have been nice. Who knows? Maybe it was never meant to be. And in that sense, I think a lot can be said about the fact that perhaps for many people, I'd like to think that maybe the Three Mothers trilogy kind of ends with Inferno, because you have Suspiria and Inferno does have a little bit of the third mother in there already. So in fact, you're getting the trilogy in those two films already. So in many ways, this third film was unnecessary. So and the fact that Daria Nicolodi apparently did not have a hand in the creation of it means that that the feeling of it being unnecessary, I think, is compounded, or it grows exponentially. So therefore, where does that leave me in my feeling of this film? It's not bad. It's not bad. It's not great. It's not bad. It's not what I would like to see as the final conclusion, but it's not terrible. And there are a lot of campy moments that make it a heck of an entertainment in the theater. When I saw it in the theater, people were just laughing and bawling, and they were laughing at the film for many of those moments. So that probably was not what the intent was. on the part of the filmmakers. But still, I think a campy, fun time in the theater is better than a dull, boring time. And so on that score alone, I think the film is a respectable success. But as a conclusion to the Third Mother's trilogy, it is it's not what one hoped it could have been. And so therefore you're left with those two feelings. And if you can reconcile the two, I think the film is far from a disappointment. So I think that's it. So let me end my discussion of The Mother of Tears here. And let me say that if you are a fan of The Mother of Tears, if you are a fan of this film, please let me know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts below and maybe get inspired by you. Again, my so-so feelings on this film doesn't mean that I dislike Inferno and Suspiria any less. And I have my issues with Inferno, as you may know from the video that I made, but still I find it to be a worthwhile film, and it's definitely a film that one should watch. Suspiria, of course, is the one for me, and I think I will go to my grave always loving that film. Always. So based on that, perhaps it was unfair to begin with. Maybe the film Mother of Tears never had a fair fighting chance, so to speak. But who knows? Maybe one of these days I will revisit this film and it might spark something in me. But if it does for you, please let me know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because as with everything else, a lot of it has to do with being inspired by you and all of your great insights, my dear friends. So if you can help me find a way to admire this film even more, please, I am all ears. Until we meet again, my friends, this is Daisuke, and I hope you have been enjoying this, and I hope you're doing well. Please take care of yourselves. Please take care of your family and friends and loved ones. And until we meet again, cheers.